Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this FreightWaves Now Community Spotlight on your Thursday morning. I'm Kaylee Nix, and it's time to check in with Loaded and Rolling. So we've got Thomas Wasson here, our enterprise trucking expert, joining us to talk all things about his favorite community. Maybe that's me throwing some bias, but it's your community, so it has to be your favorite, right, Thomas?
Well, it's my only one, and it happens to be my favorite one. If I had other communities, they would still be somewhat I love them all equally, but for now, Loaded and Rolling.
It's a personal bias, but we'll allow it. And Thomas, today we're talking about driver pay, which is honestly a really good subject and one that we hit on a lot during the 2020-2021 pandemic years because driver pay was just like absurd. It was astronomical. And really since then, we haven't talked a whole lot about it, but we do now have some new data from the ATA driver compensation study. Walk us through a little bit about what they found.
So the data is really fascinating. The last real big one they did, I think, was actually like 2021. So they're finally updating it. Looking at the data, it was a survey. I'm looking at my notes here. Don't you judge me. 120 fleets, over 150,000 employee drivers, 14,000 independent contractors. I can't remember all those facts off the top of my head. That's why you know it's real. But the big thing to talk about is the median pay, which is the middle pay, was up 10% compared to 2 years ago. We're at $76,420. That's right. I'm not making this up, people. LTL doing a lot better, $94,525 in 2023. And then the local drivers earned around 80. So there's a few things to look into. Another one I want you to think about before we dive into what this means is median compensation at a private fleets. Craig Fuller talked about how Walmart pays their drivers six figures, the Harvard of trucking in an op-ed a while back. The data shows it was $95,114 according to ATA data. That's up 12% since 2021, which was the last time they looked at it. And so when we're looking at the bigger changes, the final piece I want to highlight as we're diving in is that the shift focused towards keeping tenured drivers and not trying to attract newer ones.
That's a really, really good point because everybody talks a lot about the driver shortage, right? That's really still kind of this big buzzword in the industry. But the fact of the matter is, and you've talked about this a lot, is that we are still struggling to find a surplus of qualified drivers who are in their jobs, stay in their jobs, stay in the same consistent job, and have the time to become that really high quality driver that can drive for a Walmart, like the Harvard of the trucking industry, right? But all that to say is that this data is showing that we do have that increase of these tenured drivers, and it's being reflected in the pay. When we started talking about driver pay increases during COVID time, so 2020, 2021, the last time the ATA looked at this, everybody's big question was, well, what is this going to look like in 2 to 4 years? You're going to give these drivers these pay increases now. What happens when the freight market turns and you are now locked into these prices? Because if you walk back your rates that you're paying your drivers are going to leave your fleet. That's just what it is. People make less money after making more. They're going to leave your operation. Where do we sit at now? We're still seeing these double-digit percentage increases 2 years past, 3 years past now the fact. Why are carriers still able to do this? Why are we still seeing pay increase in median rates when we know that the trucking market, for lack of a better word, still really sucks?
Well, it's a two-parter. Supply and demand is the first part. You want better drivers, you got to pay them more. Mm-hmm. Secondly, inflation. You know how we talked about how the work from home boom, the COVID pandemic had made what we thought would be structural changes to the economy. The new work from home, like 1 out of 3, 1 out of every 2 workers was remote. And then it's kind of fell back down to earth. But that lingering inflation in terms of cost of goods and everything else, it's impacting both carriers and consumers. You can't just say that for drivers, you're going to get a pay cut. Now, the 10 to 12% is a big deal. One of the cool things about the study was that incentives such as here we go. The report found 90% of truckload carriers increased their pay during 2021, but in 2023, only 42% increased it. So we know that everyone was getting a raise when we really needed them, but now we are seeing that paring back. So I guess the biggest thing to answer your question is that carriers are attempting to pass this on, but when you listen to earnings, they say we're dealing with higher costs. This is one of them. It's very sticky. It's not going to go away. And then two, it seems like even for drivers right now, even while I'm increasing the pay, the drivers are in a worse position. So it's I've heard anecdotally from recruiters that it's hard if you're a driver because you don't really need drivers at the moment in terms of fleets aren't growing their truck count. So we are in kind of this weird wombo combo dynamic. I think that The problem is drivers did a great job getting more money, but now things are more expensive. So we're back to where we started.
So another thing that I want to hit on and make sure that this number is right. Leased on independent contractors for truckload carriers earned a median pay of $186,016 in 2023. That's double the bullet point that you had before that for drivers at private carriers, still up 12% for those private carriers, but leased on independent contractors, $186K. That's right.
That is right. But caveat asterisk here is that's your gross.
Okay.
That's not your net.
So you got to put that in my bullet point.
I should have. I was leaving it there to see if you'd bite. Nothing but net when we talk about lease purchase and drivers, because I've had instances where we did the data and we would pull it up and the drivers was like, man, I pulled in 200,000 and I only made 50. And it's like, that's because you're an independent contractor. They said, I didn't understand that. And it's like, well, you pay for your fuel. You have to pay for your insurance. You put aside a portion of your check to cover truck repairs. We leased you on, or you brought a Raggedy Ann truck to my fleet and it's breaking down. I'm sorry, but I can't help you there. That's part of the job of being a contractor. It is illustrating that. That's one of the big things we talk about predatory lease LP lease purchases and stuff like that, is when we look at that number, drivers are still going to think, oh, that can be me. I can be that 186. But when you take away all the cost, it's really at or below what a company driver is making. So that is one of those things when we talk about it. It's not a very glamorous thing. They don't want me to talk about this. If I disappear next week, the big lobbies, I exposed the lease purchasing thing, but it's really business fundamentals. You just take a bunch of drivers, no credit check, give them a truck, find out what happens. This is what we get.
So I want to talk a little bit about where we go from here, because it looks like from the data from ATA, drivers have pretty much kept up with inflation rates if you're looking at their wages. I mean, a little bit underneath, but if you're in a normal job, like, you're probably not seeing a 10 to 12% increase in your wages over the last 2 years. If you are, good on you. You're in the right place. But it begs the question of, where do we go, right? You know, we're 2 weeks away from the end of the third quarter. So we're going to get some financial data coming out of these carriers here in about a month and a half, 2 months. That, again, will give us maybe kind of a clearer picture on how they're doing financially. Maybe we'll see some wages broken down in some of those earnings reports. Maybe we won't. I don't really know. I can't tell you on a per company basis. But as we head into 2025 and look at where drivers' expectations are for their wages and the continued rate of increase versus what reality, do we think that we see a point where it starts to fall off a cliff? Do we see these carriers start to walk back some of the raises that they gave, the bonuses that they gave, as they continue to fight this really tough freight market? Or do we think that we still continue to see the upward trajectory?
I mean, I think 42% in 2023 decided we will see less raises. So I would expect that to go down to 30%. I would expect fleets are going to pair off because they can't get more rate at the moment. So you can't give them more raises. That's one of the big things we'll see. Secondly, when hearkening back to my data, over the road was 76, LTL 94, local 80. Think for a second, if you're a driver, you want to get a job local, private, which was 95, or LTL. So fleets will continue to have to put more focus on retention, because you can make more money once you get your 1 or 2 years paying your dues, going home every night. So that's going to be a continuous. Now, this is a structural problem, so it's not going away, but that's going to be something we need to watch for. And then finally, like, looking at carrier performances, if I had like a magic crystal ball into Q3, I mean, it's still going to suck. Now, make it a little better. Things that may make it better: hurricanes, FEMA freight, special projects. But we're going to continue probably to see the fact that, put my bingo card out, by the way, we're focusing more on dedicated. We're looking to expand into other modes. So yeah, right now the big goal is just, it's kind of like an animal in hibernation. Carriers are still hibernating. We thought we had some pump fakes. We had some warm days. Going back in the hole, going back to bed. That's where we're at the moment.
There we go. All right, Thomas, thanks for joining us this morning for the update for the show. Where can people find it from this week?
Check it out, FreightWaves.com/loaded and rolling, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. I'm getting this thing pre-canned. I'm getting good at this. Newsletter comes out Thursdays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can sign up for it at FreightWaves.com/loaded and rolling. And I'm a writer too. I write paid content. Check out one of my upcoming articles. They turned cow poop into renewable natural gas, and they used it to fuel their dairy trucks. That's right, folks. I'm not going to tell you which article, because I want you to read every single one for page views.
Produce, reuse, and recycle. Thanks, Thomas, for joining us this morning. We'll catch up with you next week. Have a great rest of your day.